A life, I've come to understand, is not a solid architectural structure. It is a story, a narrative woven from a series of moments, both monumental and mundane. And the most dangerous moment of all is the one where you believe you have reached the final, happy chapter. If you had asked me a year ago to summarize the story of my life, I would have told you it was a quiet, well-crafted tale of suburban contentment. I had a wife, Rachel, a woman whose beauty I believed was merely a reflection of a deeper, more profound goodness. We had a marriage of 10 years, a decade that felt like a solid, dependable foundation. We had 2 children, Abigail and Noah, who were the vibrant, chaotic, and beautiful heart of our shared narrative. I had a steady, respectable job, a career that afforded me the quiet dignity of a good provider, a man who could pay the mortgage and still make it to the soccer games on time. Life was a pancake breakfast on a Saturday morning. It was the smell of freshly cut grass in our backyard. It was the sound of my children's laughter. It was simple. It was stable. It was, I believed, perfect. Of course, perfection is an illusion, a trick of the light. And looking back now, from the wreckage of that life, I can see the subtle, hairline fractures in the facade, the ominous foreshadowing I was too content, too naive, to recognize. The first tremor was not a dramatic, earth-shattering event. It was a name, a ghost from a past I had never known, resurrected on a Tuesday afternoon. Rachel came home from a routine doctor's appointment, her face alight with a nostalgic, girlish excitement I hadn't seen in years. "You won't believe who I ran into today," she said, her voice a bright, musical thing. "Who?" I asked, my own curiosity a mild, benign thing. "Daniel," she said, and the name, in that moment, meant nothing to me. My childhood best friend. We were inseparable. I had a vague, foggy recollection of her mentioning him once or twice. A character from the prequel of her life. A story that predated my own chapter. I smiled, a genuine, uncomplicated smile. "That's great, honey. What's he doing back in town?" "Oh, just visiting family," she said, with a dismissive wave of her hand. It was so strange, seeing him after all these years. Like no time had passed at all. Her smile was genuine. Her excitement was real. And I, the loving, trusting husband, felt nothing but a quiet, vicarious happiness for her. Why would I have felt anything else? She was my wife, and trust was the very air our marriage breathed. But then, Daniel ceased to be a nostalgic anecdote and began to manifest as a presence. At first, it was just in her stories, his name a recurring character in the narrative of her day. "Daniel told the funniest story today," she would begin, and I would listen, a passive, benevolent audience to the rekindling of a childhood friendship. Then, his name began to appear on her phone, a glowing, silent messenger from another world. She would read his texts, a small, private smile touching her lips, before quickly locking the screen. "Just Daniel," she would say, if she caught me looking. "Catching up. It's harmless." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. And so I did. The first time I felt a genuine, undeniable pang of unease was the first time she invited him to our home. "It would be so good for him to meet the family," she'd said, her tone a little too bright, a little too insistent. He arrived with a bottle of expensive wine and a smile that was a masterpiece of practiced, easy charm. He was handsome, in that generic, catalog model kind of way, and he had a gift for making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the world. The children, of course, were instantly captivated. He was Uncle Daniel by the end of the evening, a new, exciting character in the story of their lives. I, however, felt like an outsider in my own home, a supporting character in a scene that was suddenly all about him and Rachel. They spoke a language of shared history, of inside jokes and half-forgotten memories, a language from which I was entirely excluded. I tried to talk to her about it, that night, after he had gone. "He seems to be around a lot," I said, my voice a careful, neutral instrument. She looked at me, her expression hardening just slightly. "He's my friend, Michael. My oldest friend. You have nothing to worry about." Her reassurance, which should have been a comfort, felt like a dismissal. It was the first time she had ever made me feel as though my feelings were an inconvenience, an obstacle to be managed. The weeks that followed were a slow, insidious escalation. Daniel was no longer just a friend. He was a fixture. He would show up at our house, unannounced, with coffee and pastries, with a new toy for Noah, with a book he thought Abigail would like. He would insert himself into our family outings, our weekend routines, his presence a constant, smiling, and deeply unsettling addition to our lives. I tried to talk to her again. I tried to explain the concept of boundaries, of the sacred, protected space of a family. She called me paranoid. She called me ridiculous. She accused me of not trusting her. And maybe she was right. Maybe the trust, that vital, life-giving air, was beginning to thin. I was not a jealous man by nature, but I am a man who understands territory. And Daniel was not just visiting our territory. He was marking it as his own. The cracks in our perfect, happy story were no longer hairline fractures. They were widening into a chasm. And I was standing on the wrong side of it, watching my wife, my life, slowly, inexorably, slip away. The quiet, creeping annexation of my life by Daniel was a masterclass in psychological warfare. He was not an overt aggressor. He was a subtle, insidious infiltrator, a man who understood that the most effective way to conquer a territory is to make its inhabitants believe you were invited. And Rachel, my wife, was not just holding the door open for him. She was sending out engraved invitations. His presence, once an occasional, jarring note in the symphony of our lives, became the dominant, recurring theme. He was at our family picnics, our trips to the zoo, our Sunday lunches. He would arrive with his easy, practiced charm, a human golden retriever of a man, and the children, in their innocent, heartbreaking way, adored him. He would kick a soccer ball with Noah for hours, his energy seemingly limitless. He would sit with Abigail, offering surprisingly insightful critiques of her latest artistic endeavors. "Is Uncle Daniel coming today?" became a regular, hopeful refrain in our home. I wanted to share their enthusiasm. I wanted to be the generous, secure husband who could embrace his wife's oldest friend. But my gut, that primitive, animal instinct, was screaming at me. There was something predatory in his perfection, something cloying in his relentless charm. He was not just being friendly. He was campaigning. He was running for the office of something. Husband? Father? I didn't know. But I knew he was trying to win an election I didn't even know was being held. The chemistry between him and Rachel was a low-grade, constant hum in the background of our lives. It was in the way their gazes would lock for a fraction of a second too long, in the shared, secret smiles that passed between them, in the easy, physical familiarity of a hand on an arm, a playful nudge. They were small things, moments so fleeting and subtle that to comment on them would be to seem insane. But I saw them. I felt them. He began to test my boundaries, small, deliberate incursions into my territory. I came home from work early one afternoon to find him in my kitchen, a wrench in his hand, kneeling under my sink. "Rachel mentioned the faucet was dripping," he said, with a shrug that was a masterpiece of feigned nonchalance. Rachel, of course, defended him. "He was just trying to help, Michael. You're reading too much into it." But I wasn't. He wasn't just fixing a faucet. He was demonstrating his utility, his competence, his ability to be the man of the house. My house. The confrontation, when I finally initiated it, was a quiet, desperate affair. The kids were in bed. Rachel was on the sofa, her face illuminated by the cold, blue light of her phone, a small, secret smile on her lips. I didn't need to ask who she was texting. "Rachel," I began, my voice a carefully controlled instrument. "Don't you think this has gone too far?" She looked up, her brow furrowed in a performance of innocent confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Him," I said. "He's here all the time. He's inserting himself into every aspect of our lives. It feels inappropriate." She sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated exasperation. She set her phone down. "Michael, he is my best friend. From childhood. Why is that so threatening to you?" "It's not the friendship," I said, choosing my words with a surgeon's precision. "It's the lack of boundaries. This is our family, Rachel, not his." Her expression hardened. "You're being ridiculous. Daniel is a good person who is trying to be a part of my life again. You're the one with the problem. Why can't you just trust me?" Trust. Asterisk the word was a weapon she wielded against me, a shield for her own questionable behavior. The argument went nowhere, a circular, frustrating dance of my accusations and her denials. She retreated to our bedroom, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline to her other, more exciting world. I lay awake that night, a cold, hard knot of dread in the pit of my stomach. Was I paranoid? Was I the jealous, controlling husband from a bad daytime television drama? Or was my intuition, my gut, my soul, screaming a truth I was too terrified to acknowledge? The next morning, Daniel appeared at our door with coffee and pastries, a smiling, benevolent god of breakfast. He handed Rachel her favorite latte, a non-fat caramel macchiato with an extra shot, a detail of her preferences her husband of 10 years, had never managed to commit to memory. He was not just visiting our lives. He was studying them. He was learning the language. He was planning a long-term occupation. And I was the only one who seemed to recognize the sound of the approaching tanks. The erosion was gradual, a slow, insidious creep of neglect. The vibrant, engaged woman I had married was being replaced by a ghost, a distracted, hollowed-out version of herself who moved through our home, but did not truly inhabit it. The shadow of Daniel had fallen over our family, and in that shadow, the bonds that had once held us together began to fray. Rachel, the woman who had once been the master architect of our chaotic but happy family life, became a stranger to its daily rhythms. Family dinners, once a non-negotiable ritual, devolved into hasty, thrown-together affairs, her presence at the table a physical fact, but not an emotional one. Abigail's soccer games, Noah's school projects, the small, sacred moments that constitute the real currency of a family's life. They all became secondary to her other, more important commitments. "I'll make it next time," became her constant, empty refrain. But next time never came. I tried to bridge the growing chasm between us. "Let's get away for a weekend," I suggested one night, a desperate plea disguised as a casual idea. "Just the two of us. Reconnect." She barely looked up from her phone. "I can't, Michael. Work is insane right now. Maybe later." Later. Asterisk, it was her favorite word, a temporal black hole into which she threw all of my hopes for our marriage. While I was trying to hold us together, she and Daniel were building their own separate world, a world constructed from a constant stream of text messages, secret lunches, and clandestine coffee dates. I would find the evidence, the small, damning artifacts of her betrayal. A receipt from a cafe on the other side of town, timestamped during a meeting she was supposed to be in. A new, expensive scarf I had never seen before, a gift, I knew, not from me. When I would confront her, my voice tight with a pain I could no longer conceal, she would deploy her well-honed defenses. "You're overreacting, Michael. He's just a friend. You're being paranoid." She was a master of gaslighting, turning my legitimate suspicions into evidence of my own emotional instability. Her transformation was not just emotional, it was physical. She began to take a new, meticulous interest in her appearance. New clothes, new makeup, a new, lighter, more carefree energy that was never, ever directed at me. She would hum to herself as she got ready in the mornings, a small, happy sound that was a dagger to my heart. Daniel, emboldened by her clear and unwavering allegiance, became more audacious in his incursions into our territory. He was no longer just a friendly visitor. He was a de facto member of our household, a co-parent, a co-husband. His comments were a form of psychological warfare, small, subtle digs designed to undermine my authority and assert his own. "You're lucky Rachel is so organized, Michael," he'd say at a family gathering, a benevolent smile on his face. "A man like you needs a strong woman to keep things running." The implication was clear. I was a passive, ineffectual bystander in my own life. The worst part was not his arrogance, but her complicity. She would laugh at his jokes, a light, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Michael's a little territorial," she'd say, as if my desire to be the sole man in my own marriage were a charming, amusing quirk. I caught the look one evening, the one that confirmed everything. He had come over to drop off a book he had borrowed, a flimsy, transparent excuse for his presence. She opened the door, and for a single, unguarded moment, her face was illuminated with a pure, unadulterated joy, a radiant, transformative light that I had not seen her shine on me in years. It was the look of a woman in love. I tried to talk to her again that night. I tried to tell her what I was seeing, what I was feeling. She dismissed me with a wave of her hand. "You're imagining things, Michael." But I wasn't. I wasn't imagining the cold, empty space in our bed. I wasn't imagining the way she would flinch, almost imperceptibly, when I tried to touch her. I wasn't imagining the secret, shared language that flowed between her and Daniel, a current of intimacy that left me stranded on the shore. I did not yet have the proof. I did not yet know the full, sordid scope of her betrayal. But I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the floor beneath my feet, that I was losing her. She was not just slipping away. She was being stolen. And Daniel was the thief. The barbecue was meant to be an act of defiant normalcy, a desperate attempt to paper over the gaping cracks in our marriage with the flimsy, cheerful wallpaper of a suburban social ritual. Rachel had insisted on inviting Daniel. He's practically family now, she'd said, the words a casual, brutal twist of the knife. I had argued, but my protests were weak, tired. To fight her on this would have been to admit the very thing I was trying to deny, that my home was no longer my own. He arrived, as he always did, with an air of effortless, unearned ownership, a bottle of expensive wine in one hand and his trademark charming smile firmly in place. He moved through my backyard as if it were his own personal fiefdom, scooping up my children in exuberant hugs, charming my neighbors with his loud, animated stories, his gaze constantly, magnetically, drawn to Rachel. I retreated to the grill, a smoking, greasy altar where I could perform the masculine ritual of cooking meat over an open flame and pretend that everything was okay. This was just a barbecue, I told myself. A few hours. Then he would be gone. But he was a master of the long game. His every action was a subtle, strategic move, designed to reinforce his position, to undermine mine. He was the center of every conversation, the sun around which the sad, small planets of my social circle now seemed to revolve. The children, in their innocent, heartbreaking way, were his unwitting accomplices. "Daddy, come play tag," they shouted, their faces alight with a pure, uncomplicated joy. To refuse would be to disappoint them, to cede the field entirely. To accept would be to leave the grill, to leave her unguarded. 5 minutes, I told myself, a silent, desperate prayer, as I joined their game. When I returned, breathless and feigning a cheerfulness I did not feel, the atmosphere had changed. The loud, boisterous energy of the party had coalesced into a quiet, tense tableau. Rachel and Daniel were standing near the edge of the patio, their bodies angled towards each other, their conversation a low, intimate murmur that was a world away from the cheerful chaos of the party. And then it happened. A moment so cinematic, so brazen, so utterly and completely devastating, that it seemed to slow time itself. He reached out, his hand cupping her face, a gesture of profound, romantic intimacy. He leaned in. He kissed her. Right there. In my backyard. In front of my children, my friends, my neighbors. In front of me. The world went silent. The laughter, the music, the cheerful hum of conversation, it all vanished, sucked into the vacuum created by this single, cataclysmic act of betrayal. The children froze, their game of tag forgotten, their faces a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. And something inside me, some long-dormant, primal, and deeply territorial animal, awoke. Hey, the word was not a word. It was a roar, a sound torn from the deepest part of my soul. I crossed the distance between us in 3 long, predatory strides. I shoved him, a violent, explosive release of months of pent-up rage and humiliation. He stumbled back, his arrogant smirk still, impossibly, in place. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I growled, my fists clenched, my body vibrating with a fury I had never known I possessed. "Relax, Michael," he said, brushing a non-existent piece of dust from his shirt. "It's not a big deal. Not a big deal." Asterisk, the words were a lit match dropped into a pool of gasoline. Not a big deal. My voice rose, a raw, ragged sound of pure, incredulous fury. "You kiss my wife, in my home, in front of my children, and you tell me it's not a big deal?" Rachel, her face as pale as death, stepped between us. "Michael, stop," she pleaded. "You're overreacting." Overreacting. Asterisk, the word, from her lips, was a final, unforgivable betrayal. Her allegiance, in this moment of ultimate crisis, was not with me, her husband, the father of her children. It was with him. His smug, triumphant expression was the final straw. My control, my reason, my civilization, it all evaporated in a cloud of white-hot rage. I swung. My fist connected with his jaw with a sound that was both sickeningly wet and deeply, profoundly satisfying. He went down, a crumpled, pathetic heap on the grass, a look of pure, unadulterated shock on his face. The yard erupted. The children were screaming. The guests were gasping. And Rachel was kneeling beside him, her hands fluttering over him, her voice a frantic, cooing murmur of apology and concern. "How could you?" she shrieked at me, her eyes blazing with a righteous fury. "You're acting like a madman." I stared at her, at this stranger who was my wife, and I felt a cold, clear, and terrible calm descend upon me. "How could I?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "How could you, Rachel? How could you let this happen? How could you do this to our children?" Her silence was the only answer I needed. I turned and walked to my children, my beautiful, terrified children, who were huddled together by the swing set, their small bodies shaking with sobs. I knelt before them, my own heart shattering into a million tiny pieces. The party was over. The illusion was over. The marriage was over. I stood in the wreckage of my own life, a man who had just discovered that his home was not a sanctuary, but a battlefield. And the war had only just begun. The chaos of the barbecue receded, leaving behind a thick, toxic silence that was more damning than any shouting match. The guests, our friends, our neighbors, had fled, their awkward, pitying glances of final, parting judgment. The children were in their rooms, the sound of their quiet, exhausted sobs a heartbreaking echo in the house. And Rachel was in the living room with him, with Daniel, tending to his broken jaw, as if he were a wounded war hero and not the architect of our family's destruction. I retreated to the backyard, to the scene of the crime, the smell of charcoal and betrayal hanging heavy in the evening air. The rage had cooled, forged into a diamond-hard resolve. This was no longer a domestic dispute. This was a war for the soul of my family, and I would not lose. When he finally left, escorted to his car by a solicitous, weeping Rachel, I went back inside. I did not speak to her. I did not look at her. I simply began to clean, to restore order to the physical space, a futile attempt to impose order on the emotional chaos that was consuming me. And then I saw it. His phone, lying on the kitchen counter, a small, dark, forgotten artifact of the afternoon's battle. He had, in his arrogant, self-assured haste to play the victim, made a fatal, amateur mistake. My hands did not tremble. My conscience did not protest. I was past all that. I was a man on a mission, and this device was a map to the enemy's camp. It was unlocked. Of course it was. A man like Daniel does not believe in consequences, and therefore, he does not believe in passcodes. The contents were a revelation, a sordid, heartbreaking, and ultimately, empowering confirmation of everything I had suspected. The text messages between him and Rachel were a timeline of their affair, a chronicle of their deceit. They were not just flirtatious. They were intimate, filled with the secret, shared language of lovers. Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you, asterisk. Michael has no idea. He's so predictable, asterisk. When can I see you again? I need you, asterisk. There were photographs. Selfies of the two of them, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, their smiles triumphant, conspiratorial. And then, the final, brutal, and irrefutable piece of evidence, a video. Short, grainy, and shot in the impersonal anonymity of a hotel room. Them, laughing, his voice a low murmur, as he leaned in to kiss her. She did not pull away. She leaned into him, her eyes closing, a look of pure, ecstatic surrender on her face. I did not break. I did not rage. I simply saved the video, the photographs, the text messages. I saved them all. I confronted her later that night. She was in the living room, her arms crossed, a shield of defiant self-pity around her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice a cold, flat thing. "About what?" she snapped. "About how you assaulted my friend." "He is not your friend, Rachel," I said. I held up his phone. "And I know everything." The color drained from her face. The defiance, the anger, it all evaporated, replaced by a pale, cornered terror. "Michael, it's not what it looks like. Don't." I cut her off, my voice rising, the last of my control beginning to fray. "Don't you dare insult my intelligence with that pathetic, cliché-ridden lie." I saw the messages. I saw the pictures. I saw the video. "How long, Rachel?" How long has this been going on? She collapsed onto the sofa, her face in her hands, her body racked with sobs. It was a mistake, she wept. I didn't mean for it to happen. A mistake. I roared, the sound a raw, wounded thing. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store. A mistake is not a months-long, systematic campaign of betrayal and deceit. You let this man into our home. You let him near our children. And you stand there and tell me it was an accident. I was lonely, she cried. You were never here. And he made me feel seen. I stared at her, at this stranger who was my wife, and the last, lingering vestiges of my love for her died. Don't, I said, my voice a deadly, quiet whisper. Don't you dare try to lay this at my feet. This is yours. You own this. Every lie, every secret meeting, every single, solitary choice. She looked up, her face a mess of tears and mascara. I'm sorry, she whispered. Please, Michael. I love you. I want to fix this. Fix this. I repeated, the words a bitter, incredulous joke. How do you fix a demolition, Rachel? She reached for me, but I stepped back, the space between us now an impassable, unbridgeable chasm. You made your choice, I said, my voice cold, hard, and final. And now, I am making mine. I turned and walked away, leaving her to drown in the wreckage she had created. My mind was already moving, planning, strategizing. This was no longer about saving a marriage. It was about protecting my children. It was about survival. And it was about ensuring that she and he would face the full, unmitigated consequences of their actions. The morning after the demolition was a landscape of profound and terrible clarity. The house was quiet, the air thick with the residue of the previous night's battle. Rachel was a ghost, a specter of shame and regret, moving through the rooms of our shared life as if she no longer belonged there. Abigail and Noah were subdued, their young minds struggling to process the seismic event that had shaken their world. And I was a man with a mission. My priority, my sole, unwavering focus, was the children. They were the innocent casualties in this war, and I would be damned if I let them suffer any more than they already had. The first step was to create a fortress of stability around them, a sanctuary from the chaos their mother had unleashed. I began to document everything. Every missed school event, every broken promise, every late-night absence of Rachel's that had predated the barbecue. I created a meticulous, damning timeline of her neglect. The evidence from Daniel's phone was the centerpiece of my case. The messages, the photos, the video, they were not just proof of an affair. They were proof of a profound and sustained dereliction of her maternal duties. She had not just been a cheating wife. She had been an absent mother. The fallout in our small, suburban world was swift and brutal. The story of the barbecue and the subsequent revelation of the affair spread like a virus. Daniel, the once charismatic golden boy, became a social pariah. His real estate business, built on a foundation of charm and personal connections, began to crumble. Clients, many of whom were our own friends and neighbors, canceled their contracts. His boss, a no-nonsense woman who valued her company's reputation above all else, fired him. The whispers, the cold shoulders, the outright disdain. It was a public shaming of the most satisfying kind. He had built his life on a lie, and now, the truth was dismantling it, brick by brick. Rachel was not immune. Her own social standing, once unassailable, was now in ruins. Friends who had once been her staunchest allies now looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. Her own family, horrified by the scope of her betrayal, offered not support, but judgment. She tried to regain control, to salvage what was left of her shattered life. She would come to me, her eyes red-rimmed and pleading, with promises of change, with tearful apologies, with desperate attempts to rewrite the narrative. I didn't mean for this to happen, she would say. But it did, Rachel. I would reply, my voice a flat, impenetrable wall. And now, we live with the consequences. I was not cruel, but I was resolute. My focus was singular. I made a point of being hyper-present for the children. I was at every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference, every school play. I was the one who packed their lunches, who helped with their homework, who read them bedtime stories. I was becoming, by necessity, both father and mother. And in the process, I was building a case, not just for the courtroom, but for the court of my own conscience. Rachel's life spiraled. Daniel's reputation was in tatters. But my world, the small, precious world that consisted of me and my children, was beginning to stabilize. We were a fortress, the three of us, and the walls were getting stronger every day. The storm their mother had unleashed was still raging outside, but inside, we were safe. And I would do whatever it took to keep it that way. The decision to file for divorce was not an act of anger. It was an act of survival. It was a formal, legal declaration that the story of Rachel and me was over, and a new story, the story of my children and me, was beginning. The courtroom, I knew, would be the final battlefield, the place where the future of my family would be decided. And I was prepared. Sandra, my lawyer, was a woman forged in the fires of 1,000 domestic wars. She was sharp, pragmatic, and possessed a bullshit detector of almost supernatural sensitivity. "The evidence is overwhelming, Michael," she said, after reviewing the meticulous dossier I had compiled. "But you need to be prepared. She will fight. She will play the victim. She will try to make this about your failures, not hers." She was right. Rachel, cornered and desperate, came to the court hearing armed with a narrative of her own. Her lawyer, a slick, silver-tongued man, painted a picture of a lonely, neglected wife, a woman who had been driven to a momentary lapse in judgment by a distant, work-obsessed husband. This affair, he argued, his voice dripping with a synthetic empathy, was not an act of malice. It was a cry for help. It was a masterful performance. But it was a performance built on a foundation of lies. And I had the truth. When it was my turn, I did not speak of my own pain. I spoke of the children. I presented the timeline of Rachel's neglect, a chronicle of missed soccer games and forgotten school events. I showed the judge the text messages, the photographs, the video. I painted a picture not of a momentary lapse in judgment, but of a sustained, calculated campaign of deceit that had put her own selfish desires above the well-being of her children. "Your Honor," Sandra said in her closing argument, her voice a calm, steady instrument of logic, "this is not a case about a failed marriage. It is a case about a failed mother. The evidence is clear. The best interests of these children lie with the one parent who has consistently, and without question, put them first. Their father." Rachel, on the stand, was a shadow of her former self. She wept. She apologized. She pleaded for a second chance. "I made a terrible mistake," she sobbed. "But I love my children." But her love, as the evidence so clearly demonstrated, had become a conditional thing, a secondary consideration to her own selfish pursuits. The judge, a woman with tired, wise eyes who had seen 1,000 broken families pass through her courtroom, delivered her verdict with a swift, decisive finality. Full legal and physical custody was awarded to me. Rachel was granted supervised visitation, her parental rights contingent on her demonstrating a sustained and genuine commitment to her own rehabilitation. Rachel did not cry. She simply sat there, a hollow, empty shell, the full weight of her consequences finally, irrevocably, crashing down upon her. I felt no triumph. There is no victory in the public destruction of the mother of your children. There was only a profound, weary relief. Abigail and Noah were safe. Their future was secure. In the days that followed, Rachel tried to reach out, but I did not engage. The story of us was over. I was focused now on the hard, necessary, and ultimately, beautiful work of rebuilding. The children and I were a new kind of family, a family forged in crisis, but a family nonetheless. And we would be okay. The fall of the house of Daniel was a quiet, pathetic affair. There were no dramatic headlines, no public shaming. There was only the slow, inexorable unraveling of a life that had been built on a foundation of charm and deceit. The barbecue had been the beginning of the end for him. In our small, tight-knit suburban world, reputations are a fragile currency, and his had been rendered worthless overnight. The whispers followed him everywhere. The man who had tried to kiss another man's wife, in his own home, in front of his own children. It was a story too sordid, too compelling, to be contained. His professional life was the first casualty. The real estate community is a small one, and trust is its most valuable asset. His clients, many of whom were our friends and neighbors, began to sever ties. His boss, a woman with a keen sense of the bottom line and a low tolerance for scandal, fired him. His charm, once his greatest weapon, was now useless. His personal life followed suit. The casual friendships, the easy flirtations, they all dried up. He was a pariah, a man whose presence was a toxic reminder of a social contract he had so flagrantly violated. I heard about his struggles through the grapevine, a series of sad, pathetic anecdotes. He was trying to find work, but his reputation preceded him. He had to sell his flashy sports car. He was late on his rent. He was spiraling. The final, definitive blow came when Rachel, in the throes of her own desperate, chaotic downfall, cut him off completely. He had been the catalyst for the destruction of her life, and now, she wanted nothing to do with him. He had been a means to an end, a tool for her own selfish pursuits, and he was no longer useful. He left town, a defeated, broken man. No one knew where he went. No one cared. He was a ghost, a cautionary tale, a man who had flown too close to the sun on wings of pure, unadulterated arrogance. I felt a certain, grim satisfaction in his downfall, yes. But mostly, I felt a quiet, profound pity. He had built his entire identity on the admiration of others, and now, he had nothing. He was a hollow man, a cautionary tale of a life lived without a moral compass. His destruction was not my victory. It was simply the inevitable, mathematical result of his own choices. And as his story faded into an insignificant footnote, my own was just beginning. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, Rachel was a castaway, adrift in the wreckage of her own life. She had lost her marriage, her home, her reputation, and, most devastatingly, the unconditional trust of her own children. For a time, she disappeared into a fog of shame and self-pity, her interactions with the children during her supervised visits strained and heartbreakingly awkward. But then, something shifted. Perhaps it was the stark, undeniable reality of her loss. Perhaps it was the quiet, unwavering disappointment in her children's eyes. Whatever the catalyst, Rachel began the long, arduous, and profoundly necessary work of facing herself. It started with a letter, not to me, but to the children. A handwritten, tear-stained apology, not for her affair, but for her absence. "I was not the mother you deserved," she wrote, "and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." She began therapy in earnest. She enrolled in parenting classes. She took a menial, humbling job that was a world away from the glamorous career she had once so desperately coveted. She was, for the first time in a very long time, taking responsibility. Her visits with the children began to change. She was no longer defensive or self-pitying. She was present. She listened. She played. She was, in short, a mother. The children were cautious. Abigail, my wise, watchful daughter, was the last to let her guard down. "Is she going to stay this time, Dad?" she asked me once, after a particularly good visit. "I don't know, sweetheart," I answered honestly. "But she's trying. And that's a good start." Slowly, tentatively, the walls began to come down. Rachel started showing up at school events, not as a glamorous, distracted visitor, but as a quiet, supportive presence in the back of the auditorium. She remembered birthdays. She asked about friends. She was, piece by painstaking piece, rebuilding the bridges she had so carelessly burned. I did not stand in her way, but I did not help her either. Her redemption was her own journey to make. My journey was a different one. It was the journey of rebuilding a life, a home, a family, from the ground up. One afternoon, she asked to meet with me. We sat in a quiet park, a neutral territory. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, Michael," she began, her voice steady. "But I need to thank you for being such a good father, for protecting them, for being the parent I was not." It was the first time she had acknowledged my own pain, my own struggle. It was a small thing, but it was significant. "I don't think we can ever go back, Rachel," I said, gently but firmly. She nodded, a sad, knowing smile on her lips. "I know, too much has been broken, but I hope that someday we can be friends." For them, her journey was not over. It would never be, but she was on the right path. As for me, I was on my own path, a path that was leading me not back to what I had lost, but forward, into a new, unknown, and unexpectedly hopeful future. The first year after the demolition was a year of quiet reconstruction. My life, once a sprawling, chaotic landscape, was now a small, well-tended garden. My world consisted of two primary elements, my children and my work. And in that simplicity, I found a new, unexpected kind of peace. The house, once a stage for a terrible drama, became a sanctuary. We filled it with laughter, with art projects, with the beautiful, mundane chaos of a family healing. We painted the living room a bright, optimistic yellow. We built a massive, elaborate Lego city in the basement. We reclaimed the space, overriding the painful memories with new, joyful ones. The children were my anchor, my true north. They were a constant, living reminder of what truly mattered. Their resilience was a daily miracle, their capacity for joy a powerful, healing force. We were a small, tight-knit unit, a three-person tribe, and we were navigating the new world together. Rachel remained a part of their lives, a distant but consistent presence. Our relationship evolved into a kind of polite, functional co-parenting. The anger and the bitterness had faded, replaced by a quiet, weary acceptance. She was a different person now, humbled and more self-aware. And I was a different person, too. The betrayal had scarred me, yes, but it had not broken me. I did not seek out a new relationship. The thought of opening myself up to that kind of vulnerability was still too terrifying. My life was full. My heart was occupied. One evening, as I was tucking Abigail into bed, she looked up at me, her eyes wide and serious. "Daddy," she said, "are we going to be okay?" I smiled, brushing the hair from her forehead. "Sweetheart," I said, the truth of the words a profound and quiet certainty in my own heart. "We are going to be more than okay." And in that moment, I knew it was true. The story of my life had not been the one I would have written for myself. It had been a story of betrayal, of loss, of unimaginable pain. But it had also become a story of resilience, of redemption, and of the quiet, unbreakable strength of a father's love. It was not a perfect story, but it was ours, and it was enough.